Family is sacred until a will and over $2 million appear. When my mother and brother parked their rented Porsche at my inherited desert house, handing me a fake eviction notice with smug grins, they assumed I would just back down. They had no idea that for the past 8 months, I had turned this estate into a flawless legal trap. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes you must amputate a necrotic wound. Hello, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our channel's monetization features, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep our operations running smoothly. If you find today's story engaging and worthwhile, please consider supporting us with just a $1 donation so that we can pay our hardworking staff to cover their living expenses and continue creating high-quality stories for you to enjoy. You can easily support us by scanning the QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by clicking the direct donation link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. My name is Leighton Dominguez, and I am 30 years old. I work as a senior risk analyst at Ethelgard Dynamics, a prominent corporate intelligence and security firm. My entire professional life is dedicated to anticipating catastrophic failures before they ever have the chance to manifest, day in and day out. I sit in a sterile, heavily guarded office, meticulously dissecting complex corporate contracts, hunting down every conceivable legal loophole, hidden liability, and structural weakness. My brain has been rigorously trained to look past smiling faces and firm handshakes, expecting the absolute worst in both people and massive institutions. It is an exhausting, cynical way to view the world, but it is precisely why I was able to see the incoming hurricane from my own family from 1,000 miles away. To truly understand the toxic bloodline I come from, you only need to observe the two people who share a significant portion of my DNA. My mother, Valerie, is a relentless, unapologetic shopaholic. She is the kind of woman who measures a person's intrinsic worth entirely by the designer label on their handbag and the exclusivity of their residential zip code. She is currently drowning under a suffocating mountain of credit card debt, yet she continues to buy outrageously expensive shoes and attend lavish country club luncheons, pretending her imminent financial ruin simply does not exist. Then there is my older brother, Julian. He proudly calls himself a visionary startup chief executive officer down in the hyper-competitive bubble of Silicon Valley. He possesses the slick, expensive haircut, the overpriced minimalist wardrobe, and a vocabulary built entirely out of tech buzzwords and empty promises. What he glaringly lacks, however, is a profitable, functioning business. Behind the incredibly shiny press releases and his arrogant social media posts, his tech company is hemorrhaging cash daily and teetering precariously on the absolute edge of bankruptcy. Both of them are absolute masters at projecting a flawless facade of immense wealth, all while standing proudly on rapidly crumbling, rotten foundations. Contrast their hollow, performative existence with my late Aunt Clara. She was my father's sister, a delightfully eccentric and fiercely independent woman who never married and never had children. She firmly believed that genuine peace could only be found far away from the superficial, deafening noise of modern society. When she passed away peacefully last year, she shocked the entire extended family by leaving everything entirely to me. Her legacy was not just a simple sum of money, it was a breathtaking, mid-century modern glass house, perfectly isolated on a stunning red rock hill in Sedona, Arizona. The property featured gorgeous floor-to-ceiling glass walls that caught the fierce desert sunrise, blending seamlessly with the rugged, ancient landscape. Professional real estate appraisers valued the property at over $2.5 million. But to me, its worth was entirely sentimental and completely immeasurable in financial terms. I inherited this incredible sanctuary simply because I was the sole family member who actually loved her for exactly who she was. During her final years, when her physical health began a slow, inevitable decline, I dedicated my weekends to driving out to the sweltering desert. I would sit with her on the quiet patio, listen to her scratchy old jazz records, and watch the sun cast long, purple shadows over the deep canyons. Valerie and Julian, on the other hand, actively scoffed at her very existence. They dismissively called her the crazy desert lady and ruthlessly mocked her modest lifestyle, never once bothering to visit her unless they mistakenly thought they could extract some quick cash from her bank accounts. Knowing the bottomless depths of my mother and brother's greed, I knew the very second the details of the will became public knowledge, they would descend upon me like a flock of starving vultures. They would view a $2.5 million estate not as Clara's sacred resting place, but as their own personal, bottomless piggy bank to fund their grand delusions and magically pay off their massive, embarrassing debts. So, I put my professional risk management background to work immediately. I never once put the Sedona house in my own name. Instead, before the ink on the final probate documents was even completely dry, I quietly and efficiently transferred the entire estate into an anonymous shell company, a limited liability company that I secretly and totally controlled. But I did not stop at simply hiding the ownership behind a corporate veil. The property was home to a highly specific, rare type of desert flora. Using this obscure environmental detail, I waded through an agonizingly dense, months-long bureaucratic process to officially register that exact plot of land as a privately owned, federally protected ecological reserve. I kept this impenetrable legal fortress completely to myself, just as I predicted. The eerie silence following the funeral did not last long. Soon enough, the phone calls from California started rolling in. Julian and Valerie began probing me, casually asking invasive questions about the estate's liquid assets, dropping incredibly heavy hints about needing temporary bridge loans and urgent investment capital. Instead of shutting them down with the aggressive reality of the situation, I played the absolute fool. I acted overwhelmed and financially panicked. I just do not understand any of this. I told Julian during one particularly tense phone call, making sure my voice trembled slightly. The inheritance taxes are completely crushing me, and the legal paperwork is an absolute nightmare. I sighed heavily into the receiver, feeding them a carefully crafted narrative of a weak, confused younger sister who was completely lost and did not know how to handle such a massive, complicated property. They swallowed the bait whole, hook, line, and sinker. They heard my feigned confusion and saw nothing but an ignorant, defenseless target just waiting to be brilliantly exploited. The blinding Arizona sun was beating down heavily on the red rocks when the crunch of gravel shattered the total silence of my sanctuary. I was sitting on the back patio with a mug of black coffee, watching a rented midnight black Porsche SUV tear aggressively up my private driveway. The doors swung open, and out stepped my mother, Valerie, my brother, Julian, and a third man I did not recognize. The stranger wore a cheap, poorly tailored gray suit, clutching a worn leather briefcase, his eyes darting around nervously like a rat caught in a trap. He possessed the undeniable aura of a strip mall lawyer who specialized in exploiting desperation. I remained seated, watching them march up the stone pathway with the unearned confidence of conquering heroes. Julian did not even bother to knock. He simply pushed open the heavy glass door, striding into the living room as if he had already bought the place. Valerie followed closely behind, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished concrete floor, her eyes immediately scanning the expensive mid-century furniture as if she were calculating its auction value. "Hello to you too," I said mildly, standing up and stepping inside. Julian did not waste time with pleasantries. He stopped right in the middle of the living room, reached into the shady lawyer's briefcase, and aggressively slapped a thick stack of legal papers onto my glass coffee table. The loud smack echoed sharply in the quiet house. "Pack your things, Leighton," Julian commanded, crossing his arms over his expensive designer shirt. A sickeningly smug grin stretched across his face. "We found a newly discovered codicil to Aunt Clara's will." I looked down at the papers, then back up at him, maintaining my carefully constructed mask of utter confusion. "A codicil? What are you talking about?" The sleazy lawyer cleared his throat, finally stepping forward. It appears your aunt amended her final testament just weeks before her passing. The revised document explicitly revokes your inheritance of this specific property. It places the Sedona estate entirely in Julian's name for, quote, business development and entrepreneurial expansion. Your revised inheritance has been adjusted to a single, lump sum payment of $10,000. I stared at the document on the table, my eyes, trained by years of corporate risk analysis, instantly locked onto the final page. It was a masterpiece of amateur fraud. Aunt Clara's signature was there, but it was far too perfect. The pen pressure did not vary. The ink did not bleed naturally into the paper fibers, and the loop of the letter C was identical to a signature she had used on a public tax document 3 years ago. It was a sophisticated digital copy, likely lifted from a scanned PDF and printed using a high-quality laser printer. It was not a signature. It was a poorly executed replication. Instead of calling out the blatant forgery, I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic, widening my eyes to simulate the exact look of a cornered, terrified victim. I let a few genuine-looking tears pool in the corners of my eyes. Valerie saw my supposed breakdown and immediately swooped in, playing the role of the compassionate, deeply concerned mother. She placed a heavily manicured hand on my shoulder, giving it a squeeze that felt more like a threat than a comfort. "Oh, sweetheart, please do not make a massive fuss out of this," Valerie cooed, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. You know, Clara was completely out of her mind at the end. She finally saw reason and realized Julian is the only one who can actually manage an asset of this magnitude. You do not need a massive glass house in the middle of nowhere. Take the $10,000. It is a very generous amount for someone your age. You need to be out of here in exactly 48 hours so Julian can get the appraisers in. 48 hours, I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly. I looked directly at Julian, letting a tear finally spill over my cheek. Are you two really going to do this to me? Are you seriously throwing me out of her house? Julian chuckled. It was a dry, arrogant sound. He leaned in, completely intoxicated by his own perceived victory. It is just business, little sister. Vervecore needs capital, and this property is the perfect collateral. In fact, you should probably know that the legal gears are already turning. I have already submitted this very document to secure a massive commercial mortgage through a federal bank headquartered in California. The funds are practically clearing as we speak. So, yes, you are leaving. Do not try to fight it, because you simply do not have the money for a legal battle. My heart did a violent, joyful leap inside my chest. A federal bank, across state lines. He had just voluntarily confessed to using a forged legal document to secure a fraudulent loan across state borders. In my line of work, we call that a textbook violation of federal law, specifically wire fraud and bank fraud. He had practically handed me his own arrest warrant tied up with a neat little bow. I looked down at the floor, biting my lip to keep from smiling. "Okay," I said quietly, my voice trembling with fake defeat. "I will start packing." "Good girl," Valerie said, patting my cheek condescendingly. "We will be back on Friday morning with the construction crew to start remodeling the grounds. Have your bags ready." They turned around and walked out exactly the same way they came in, radiating toxic arrogance. I stood absolutely still in the middle of the living room, listening to the heavy doors of the Porsche slam shut, followed by the roar of the engine as they sped back down the gravel driveway toward the main highway. The second their car disappeared from view, the terrified, helpless girl vanished completely. I reached up, wiped the single tear from my cheek, and let out a long, highly satisfied breath. I walked over to the coffee table, picked up the fraudulent codicil, and tossed it carelessly onto the sofa. Then, I reached into my pocket, pulled out my smartphone, and dialed the direct, unlisted number for the senior corporate litigation team at my firm. It was time to spring the trap. Exactly 48 hours later, the pristine silence of the Arizona morning was brutally shattered by the rumbling of heavy diesel engines, a massive yellow bulldozer, accompanied by 2 large construction pickup trucks, crawled aggressively up the gravel driveway. The rented black SUV led the procession, kicking up thick clouds of red dust. They parked recklessly near the delicate desert landscaping. Julian hopped out of the driver's seat, holding a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints, pointing eagerly toward a cluster of rare century-old cacti. Valerie emerged right behind him, wearing a ridiculous oversized sun hat and oversized sunglasses, looking like she was ready to supervise the construction of a luxury resort. They had brought an entire demolition crew to rip apart the natural ecosystem and pour concrete for a massive swimming pool, solely to artificially inflate the property value for their fraudulent mortgage. They expected to find me in tears, surrounded by moving boxes. Instead, I was sitting comfortably in a cushioned rattan chair on the shaded front porch, sipping a hot cup of chamomile tea. I was not alone. Standing to my left was Marcus, the lead corporate attorney from the legal firm representing my holding company. He was dressed in an immaculate dark navy suit, holding a slim leather folder. Standing on either side of the wide porch stairs were two heavily armed United States Marshals. They wore tactical vests with federal insignias clearly visible, their presence radiating an absolute, unyielding authority. Julian did not immediately notice the men on the porch. He was too busy yelling instructions to the construction foreman. "Tear all of this brush out first," Julian shouted, gesturing wildly at the protected flora. "I want this entire quarter-acre completely leveled by noon so we can start mapping out the infinity pool. Go ahead and fire up the excavator." The foreman nodded and turned to signal his operator. But before the heavy machinery could even rev its engine, one of the federal agents stepped firmly down the stone stairs and raised his right hand. "Turn the machines off," the marshal commanded. His voice was not loud, but it carried a sharp, authoritative edge that cut straight through the mechanical noise. "Nobody is digging up a single inch of this soil today." Julian spun around, his arrogant smile instantly faltering as his eyes finally registered the tactical vests and the badges. He blinked, trying to process the scene, then quickly rearranged his face into a mask of righteous indignation. "Excuse me, officers, but there must be some kind of misunderstanding here," Julian said, puffing out his chest and marching toward the steps. "I am the legal owner of this estate. I have the signed will right here in my car. My sister is just a disgruntled former tenant who is refusing to vacate the premises." Marcus, my attorney, calmly walked down the steps to meet Julian. He opened his leather folder and extracted a crisp, watermarked document. "Mr. Dominguez, my name is Marcus Vance. I represent the independent corporate entity that holds the exclusive deed to this property," Marcus stated, his tone completely devoid of emotion. "The document you are referring to, the alleged codicil to your late aunt's will, is legally irrelevant. You see, Clara did not own this house at the time of her passing. She legally transferred the entire estate into a limited liability company 11 months before her death. You cannot inherit an asset from someone who does not legally own it. Your piece of paper is entirely worthless." Julian's face flushed a deep, angry red. "That is a lie. My lawyer verified the paperwork. This is my property." Marcus ignored Julian's outburst and turned his attention directly to the construction foreman, who had walked over to see what the commotion was about. "Sir," Marcus said clearly, handing a different document to the foreman, "this specific parcel of land is officially registered with the federal government as a protected ecological reserve. If you or your crew damage a single plant on this property, you will be in direct violation of federal conservation laws. The penalties include immediate confiscation of all your commercial equipment, massive corporate fines, and up to 5 years in federal prison for destruction of protected national assets." The foreman's eyes widened in absolute horror as he read the federal seal on the paper. He did not hesitate for a single second. He turned around, blew a sharp whistle, and yelled at his crew, "Pack it up, shut the machines down, and load them back on the trailers right now. We are leaving." "Wait, you cannot leave," Valerie shrieked, running forward and waving her manicured hands frantically. "We are paying you a premium rate for today. I am not going to federal prison for your swimming pool. Lady, the foreman spat back, already climbing into his truck. Within 2 minutes, the entire construction crew had reversed down the driveway and disappeared, leaving Julian and Valerie standing alone in the dust. The trap was now fully sprung. The second federal agent, who had remained silent up until this point, pulled a small notepad from his chest pocket. "Julian Dominguez," the marshal said, his voice cold and precise. "Our office was contacted by the Corporate Fraud Division yesterday. We have been informed that you submitted a digitally forged document to a financial institution located in California in order to secure a commercial loan against a property located here in Arizona." Julian froze, the remaining color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. "I do not know what you are talking about. My lawyer handled the filing. By electronically transmitting fraudulent documents across state lines to secure funds," the marshal continued, completely ignoring Julian's pathetic stuttering. "You have crossed into federal jurisdiction. That constitutes a direct violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 1343, commonly known as wire fraud. Additionally, you are facing severe charges for federal bank fraud. This is an active, ongoing criminal investigation." Valerie gasped loudly. Finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the situation, she frantically began digging through her expensive designer purse, pulling out her phone. "Call him, Julian. Call that lawyer we hired. Tell him to get down here and fix this mess right now." Julian pulled out his own phone with violently shaking hands and dialed the number. I sat on the porch, taking another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my chamomile tea as I watched him hold the phone to his ear. The silence stretched on. Finally, Julian slowly lowered the device. "The number is disconnected," Julian whispered, his voice trembling with genuine terror. The cheap, sleazy attorney they had hired to legitimize their forgery had obviously taken his retainer fee and vanished into thin air the absolute second he realized the sheer scale of the fraud he was being asked to facilitate. He knew better than to stick around when federal agents were involved. "Consider this your official warning," the marshal stated, stepping back onto the porch. "Do not attempt to leave the country. Do not attempt to contact the bank. You will be receiving a formal summons from the federal prosecutor very soon. I strongly suggest you find a very good criminal defense attorney. Now, get off this property before you are arrested for criminal trespassing." Humiliation radiated from them in visible waves. Valerie was shaking uncontrollably, her face twisted in a mixture of profound shock and absolute rage. Julian looked completely broken, his arrogant Silicon Valley persona shattered into a million unrecoverable pieces. They turned without saying another word, stumbling back to their rented Porsche. They drove away at a fraction of the speed they had arrived. It was a flawless, surgical victory. But as I watched their car disappear, I knew people like my mother and brother never simply accept defeat. The legal battle was over, but the dirtiest part of the war was just about to begin. When a venomous predator is finally cornered, it does not simply surrender. It thrashes wildly, desperate to inflict as much collateral damage as physically possible before going down. I fully anticipated a retaliatory strike, but I vastly underestimated the sheer, terrifying cruelty my own mother was capable of unleashing. If she could not have the multi-million-dollar property, she was going to make absolutely certain that I had no life left to enjoy it. Less than 72 hours after their humiliating retreat from the desert, the psychological warfare began. My smartphone suddenly erupted into a relentless frenzy of notifications. Cousins I had not spoken to in over a decade, distant aunts, and family friends began bombarding me with hateful text messages and blistering voicemails. The barrage was entirely coordinated. Valerie had crafted a massive, emotionally manipulative email and blasted it to the entire extended family network. I sat at my kitchen island, my stomach twisting into tight knots as I read the poisonous words on my screen. Valerie painted a horrifying, completely fabricated picture. She claimed that during Aunt Clara's final vulnerable months, I had been secretly administering heavy, unprescribed sedatives to keep the old woman docile and heavily confused. She wove a tragic narrative of a helpless, drugged aunt being ruthlessly coerced into signing away her entire life savings to a sociopathic niece. My mother willingly portrayed her own flesh and blood as an elder abuser, simply to preserve her fragile, victimized social standing and deflect from her own monumental failures. The family swallowed the lie instantly. I was officially ostracized, branded a greedy monster, and verbally attacked from all sides. Then came Julian's incredibly predictable contribution to the mudslinging. A heavy, certified envelope arrived in my mailbox, dispatched by a notoriously aggressive, bottom-feeding litigation attorney based out of Los Angeles. It was a formal extortion demand, masked as a pre-litigation settlement offer. The letter aggressively demanded that I pay them a staggering $500,000 in immediate compensation for the severe emotional distress and profound psychological trauma I had allegedly inflicted upon them. The final paragraph contained a thinly veiled threat. If I failed to wire the $500,000 within exactly 14 days, they would leak the fabricated elder abuse story to every local news station and tabloid newspaper in Arizona. They wanted to see media vans parked outside my private sanctuary, broadcasting my completely ruined reputation to the entire state. But the absolute darkest, most unforgiven blow was yet to come. On a perfectly normal Tuesday morning, my security badge was abruptly deactivated right at the front turnstile of Ethelgard Dynamics. 2 imposing security guards escorted me not to my desk, but straight into the sterile, glass-walled conference room of the Human Resources Department. Sitting across the table were the Director of Human Resources and our company's Chief Information Security Officer. They solemnly informed me that an anonymous, highly detailed whistleblower complaint had been sent directly to the corporate board of directors late Sunday night. The sender explicitly accused me of utilizing highly secure proprietary corporate software to illegally launder money and execute fraudulent financial transactions across state lines. The realization hit me like a physical punch to the throat. Valerie had gone for the jugular. She knew how highly I valued my career. She knew my job required a flawless, spotless record of absolute ethical integrity. By planting a seed of severe financial corruption, she was actively trying to get me fired, blacklisted from the corporate risk industry, and ultimately left entirely destitute. She wanted to burn my entire world to the ground so she could stand warmly by the fire. Being the target of an active internal corporate investigation is an incredibly isolating, terrifying experience. My company laptop was instantly confiscated, and I was placed on mandatory unpaid administrative leave. A weaker person would have completely broken down right there in that cold office. But my mother forgot one crucial detail about where I worked. Ethelgard Dynamics is one of the premier intelligence and security firms in the country. We do not just blindly accept anonymous allegations. We forensically hunt down the source. Instead of crying or begging for my job, I leaned forward, looked the Chief Information Security Officer dead in the eyes, and offered my total, unconditional cooperation. I signed every digital waiver they put in front of me, granting them absolute access to audit every single keystroke I had ever made on the corporate network. I then calmly laid out the exact context of my ongoing family situation, including the federal wire fraud investigation currently surrounding my brother. Our cybersecurity engineers genuinely love a good hunt. They took the anonymous, encrypted email that had been sent to the board and began dissecting its digital footprint. It took them less than 48 hours to peel back the layers of cheap, commercially available VPN routing the sender had used. The tracking data led them straight to a public wireless network located inside a luxury coffee shop within a high-end, exclusive shopping mall in Southern California. It was the exact same upscale mall where Valerie held a premium VIP membership. Furthermore, the final metadata ping captured the specific model of the mobile device used to send the message, matching my mother's exact phone model, right down to a highly specific operating system patch she had downloaded just 3 days prior. I was not just cleared of all wrongdoing, I was now armed with irrefutable, digital proof that the woman who gave birth to me had committed severe corporate defamation and malicious libel. She had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her. I had spent my entire adult professional life mapping out worst-case scenarios, identifying structural vulnerabilities, and neutralizing massive threats for multinational corporations. I knew precisely how to dismantle a target system piece by piece until nothing but dust remained. My mother and brother had played incredibly dirty, relying on raw emotion, vicious manipulation, and cheap theatrical tricks. I was going to respond with cold, hard, heavily documented data. The guillotine was fully assembled. The blade was sharpened to a razor edge, and it was finally time to let it drop. First, I had to completely extinguish the raging fire of the family gossip. I did not waste my breath calling my aunts or cousins to passionately defend my character. Explaining myself would only validate their toxic drama and give them the desperate attention they craved. Instead, I spent an entire evening compiling a highly encrypted, read-only digital dossier. Into this secure folder, I uploaded a high-resolution scan of Julian's pathetic forged codicil, placed right next to the formal deed of the limited liability company, proving Aunt Clara had transferred the property almost a full year before her death. I added a comprehensive financial background check I had legally obtained on Valerie, highlighting over $150,000 in revolving credit card debt and a series of desperate, high-interest personal loans she had taken out to fund her shopping addictions. Finally, I uploaded a crystal clear, 10-minute audio file. During their first unannounced visit, my discreet home security system had perfectly captured their voices echoing loudly in my living room. The audio clearly featured Julian boasting about securing a fraudulent federal loan across state lines, and Valerie ruthlessly demanding I vacate the premises within 48 hours. I pasted the secure link directly into the massive extended family group chat on my phone. I added a single, completely objective sentence: "Here is the absolute truth, backed by undeniable evidence." Before a single person could even begin typing a frantic reply, I permanently exited the group and completely deleted the messaging application from my phone. According to the few cousins who desperately tried to text me directly afterward, the fallout was nothing short of apocalyptic. The undeniable, digital proof shattered Valerie's fragile victim narrative in an instant. The very same family members who had blindly believed her lies were suddenly confronted with the reality of her severe gambling and shopping debts. The entire family's collective outrage pivoted instantly, turning directly onto her and Julian like a pack of starving wolves. With the toxic family network neutralized, I turned my crosshairs directly onto Julian's beloved, heavily inflated tech empire. A quick dive into public corporate filings revealed the primary venture capital firm currently keeping his company, Verve Corp, barely afloat. Venture capitalists are notoriously skittish creatures. They will absolutely flee at the very first sign of genuine legal liability or criminal behavior. I drafted a highly professional, meticulously cited email to the managing partners of the investment board. I did not make emotional accusations. I simply provided the confirmed public records. I attached the formal notice of the active federal wire fraud investigation involving their chief executive officer, the property deed proving he had attempted to collateralize a multi-million-dollar asset he did not actually own, and the specific federal statutes he had blatantly violated. I hit send on a Tuesday morning. The corporate dominoes fell with breathtaking, brutal speed. By Thursday afternoon, the venture capital firm had initiated an emergency, closed-door board meeting. By Friday morning, they officially pulled all remaining Series B funding. Without that critical cash injection, Verve Corp could not even make basic payroll for its employees. The board of directors immediately and publicly ousted Julian from his position as chief executive officer, formally severing all ties to aggressively distance themselves from his toxic legal radioactivity. Before the week was completely over, the company officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Julian's entire fake Silicon Valley persona was publicly and irreparably annihilated. His reputation in the tech industry reduced to absolute ash. That left my mother. Valerie genuinely thought she could maliciously attack my livelihood from the shadows, hide behind a completely anonymous email, and walk away entirely unscathed. But she fundamentally misunderstood the sheer, terrifying power of a multi-billion-dollar corporate legal department. Ethelgard Dynamics did not just clear my name and reinstate my security clearance, they went entirely on the offensive. A premier corporate intelligence firm simply cannot allow the public perception that their highly secure systems can be compromised or used for money laundering, even if the accusation is completely fabricated. The legal department officially filed a massive civil lawsuit against Valerie in the state of California for malicious corporate defamation, tortious interference with a business contract, and filing a false corporate report. Because she had attacked the company's integrity, they demanded a staggering settlement of $2 million in punitive damages. The very moment the lawsuit was officially filed in the California court system, the corporate lawyers moved aggressively to place emergency legal freezes on all of her remaining bank accounts and physical assets to prevent her from attempting to hide any money. Valerie, who already lived her entire life completely drowning in massive debt just to maintain her pathetic country club illusion, was instantly and totally financially paralyzed. Her premium credit cards were suddenly declined at the grocery store. Her beloved luxury SUV was immediately flagged for imminent repossession. She was facing absolute total financial ruin, completely trapped in a steel cage built entirely by her own malicious actions. In the days that followed this massive counterattack, my personal cell phone began ringing off the hook. The exact same relatives who had ruthlessly cursed my name just a week prior were now flooding my voicemail inbox with frantic, tearful apologies. They begged for my forgiveness, desperately claiming they had been horribly manipulated and brainwashed by my mother. They sent long, pathetic text messages swearing they always knew Valerie was a liar. I listened to exactly none of them. I did not reply with anger, or vindication, or even a simple acknowledgement of their existence. I simply tapped the block button on every single incoming number, one by one. Absolute silence is the most devastating answer you can possibly give to people who thrive on toxic chaos. I severed the infected, necrotic tissue of my family tree with one clean, final, unforgiving strike, leaving them to rot in the mess they had created. When you push a narcissist into a corner and strip away their carefully constructed illusions, they do not self-reflect. They completely self-destruct. I knew Julian had reached his absolute breaking point when his company collapsed, and federal prison became a mathematical certainty. I also knew that his fragile ego would demand one final, catastrophic act of vengeance against the person he blamed for his downfall. That is why I was nowhere near the Sedona house on the night of November 12th. I was safely checked into a high-security hotel suite 40 miles away, wide awake, staring at the live feed of my security application on my tablet. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, the motion sensors along the perimeter fence pinged. The infrared cameras picked up a lone figure trudging up the gravel path. It was Julian. He was not wearing his expensive designer suits anymore. He wore a dark hoodie, gripping a heavy steel crowbar in his right hand and carrying a massive 5-gallon plastic red gasoline can in his left. His plan was brutally simple and completely idiotic. In his delusional, collapsing mind, burning the property to the ground would destroy the physical evidence of his fraud, punish me by destroying my sanctuary, and perhaps trigger some chaotic insurance payout he still believed he was entitled to. He approached the rear patio, raised the crowbar, and violently smashed through the reinforced glass panel of the back door. The sound of shattering glass echoed loudly over the silent desert. He reached through, unlocked the handle, and stepped inside. He immediately began splashing harsh-smelling gasoline all over my beautiful mid-century furniture and the polished concrete floors. He had absolutely no idea he had just walked straight into a digital vault. From the comfort of my hotel bed, I simply tapped a single red icon on my tablet screen. The house was equipped with a top-tier, military-grade smart security grid. Instantly, heavy titanium deadbolts automatically engaged on every single exterior door and interior hallway threshold. The reinforced window shutters slammed shut and locked magnetically. Julian was instantly and completely sealed inside the main living room. He dropped the gasoline can when the automated locks engaged. He ran to the front door, yanking desperately at the handle, but it would not budge. He swung his crowbar frantically at the reinforced front windows, but they were coated with a shatterproof ballistic film. He was trapped like a rabid animal in a cage. Meanwhile, the exact same button press on my tablet had immediately dispatched a priority. Silent alarm directly to the county sheriff's department. I sat back and watched the live feed as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the desert sky just 12 minutes later. 4 heavily armed police cruisers skidded to a halt in the driveway. The officers breached the house with weapons drawn, finding Julian kneeling on the floor, reeking of gasoline, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. They slapped cold steel handcuffs on his wrists and dragged him out into the freezing night air. But the absolute crowning moment of this entire ordeal did not happen at the house. It happened 3 hours later down at the local precinct. Valerie had received a frantic phone call from Julian right before they confiscated his phone. She drove wildly to the police station in the middle of the night, demanding to bail her precious son out. When the desk sergeant informed her that Julian was being held without bail on federal charges and attempted arson, Valerie completely snapped. Her mind, already broken by her impending financial ruin, descended into total hysteria. She began screaming at the officers right there in the crowded lobby. "You cannot lock him up," she shrieked hysterically. "He is a chief executive officer. He did not even want the house. It was my idea. I was the one who traced Clara's signature from the tax return I printed the fake will. Not him. You are ruining his life over my idea." Every single police officer in that lobby was wearing an active, recording body camera. Valerie had just marched into a police precinct and voluntarily, loudly confessed to federal forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud on crystal clear, high-definition video. The officers simply stared at her in stunned silence before calmly reading her Miranda rights, and placing her under arrest right next to her son. The aftermath was swift and completely merciless. Julian was officially indicted on multiple federal charges, including wire fraud, bank fraud, breaking and entering, and conspiracy to commit arson. He is currently awaiting trial in a federal detention center, facing up to 20 years behind bars. Valerie avoided immediate prison time due to her lack of prior violent offenses, but she was sentenced to 5 years of strict probation. Her massive civil lawsuit resulted in total bankruptcy. Her country club memberships were revoked. Her luxury vehicles were seized, and she now lives in a tiny, depressing one-bedroom apartment, working an entry-level retail job just to survive. A week after the arrests, I finally returned to the Sedona house. The police had cleared the crime scene, and a professional cleaning crew had completely scrubbed away the harsh stench of gasoline. I hired a contractor to replace the single shattered glass door. Once the workers left, absolute silence finally returned to the Red Rocks. That evening, I poured myself a generous glass of expensive red wine and walked out onto the patio. I sat in Aunt Clara's favorite chair and looked out over the vast, ancient landscape. The Arizona sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in breathtaking shades of deep violet and burning gold. For the first time in my entire life, I felt no anxiety, no looming threats, and no heavy burdens. I had surgically removed the toxic, necrotic infection that was my biological family. I took a slow sip of my wine, breathing in the crisp, clean desert air. I had successfully protected my sanctuary, and finally, I had found the profound, beautiful freedom of living a life entirely on my own terms. Thank you so much, dear listeners of Maya Revenge Stories, for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know, where are you tuning in from today? Please let me know in the comments. If you found my story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping our channel out. With YouTube disabling our monetization features, we rely entirely on your kindness. A small donation of just $1 helps pay the wonderful staff here so they can feed their families and continue bringing you these incredible stories. You can support us by scanning the QR code right on your screen, or by clicking the donation link in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again. Stay safe and always protect your peace.